Thanks, Yaju. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I'm Henry Endemann, currently in the Netherlands. You see here on the first slide, you see two affiliations. Basically, the first is Buck Consultants International of BCI. That's a consultancy firm I'm currently working for. We work on spatial economic strategies. I can talk a bit about what that is later on. But the other affiliation you see here is Hong Kong PolyU. I heard you just had a lecture from Gerhard. Gerhard was actually also my supervisor for my PhD, which I finished in 2023. So I lived for 3 years in Hong Kong. I'm originally from Germany. Yeah, but then I was in Hong Kong, also worked a lot together with Jia Xu, also in Shenzhen, before she came to CUHK. So that's a bit my connection to Hong Kong, to China, to Greater China. And I want to talk today a bit about the Megaregion-Megaprojects interplay. I mean, you're now in these weeks in this summer course that you're having, you're mostly looking at the mega projects. And I want to, I won't have too much theory on that, but want to switch it a bit around and start with the mega regions and theory on that. And I think that could be very helpful for you. I've just been told that you're all architecture students, so I think this might be a very different kind of scale, different kind of perspective to deal with. But I think it can be very helpful to understand the bigger scale of what you're doing and how mega projects start to exist and how they are being planned and prepared. Now, do you also see the next slide now? Yes. Yeah. So because it's a lot about these big kind of projects that we see, right? But they are always part of a bigger collection of urban projects of an urban fabric, right? So I think this was a rather nice picture from Shenzhen where you see all these different blocks on the horizon basically, but then you still see in the foreground other stuff being developed, and that's how everything is kind of related. I'm going to talk about, or structure this in 3 parts. First, the theory, and the theory is really on mega regionalization. So how mega projects are created and are being transformed. Then we apply that specifically to the Greater Bay Area. So that's where you are right now. And then we conclude with what that mega region, mega projects interplay actually is. Starting with the theory. This is the part, I think, where you can just lean back a little, right? It's not important that you understand every little detail, but it's really a big part of theory and to give you an impression of all the, really for more than 100 years, what people in academia have been saying about mega regions. And let's see, here and there you might find interesting stuff, but it's not essential that you understand and remember every detail of it. Because we can go back very far to people like Robert Haig, right? And you see here from 1926, who was already talking about an understanding of the metropolis. This is New York, what you see here on the right, which already in 1926 was quite a big city. They already had a stock market and these kind of things. You see high buildings, important stuff happening there. And Robert Haig was already talking about urban concentration and how some functions are being located inside the city or outside of the city. So that's actually how far we can go back to look at the start of mega regions in a theoretical way. I mean, you can always look back further and go to the very historic times, but I think this is in the modern history a nice starting point. Because we also see people like Patrick Geddes, and that was actually even earlier, but I'm talking about urban crystallization. This is a map of the UK, and he's already mapping these cities. You see London, but you see also Manchester, Liverpool, these places which are somehow extending the pure city. He says that there's this, he makes a critique on overgrowth and says that what's happening around these cities is already, it's highly concentrated, but in the same time, it's bigger than the city itself. And then there's also a good friend of Patrick Geddes, then was Lewis Mumford, who talks about this overgrowth kind of as an evolution, right? And it's the first time the megalopolis is actually mentioned, because he talks about there's a city that starts as a village, it then grows into a metropolis, and at some point it becomes a megalopolis. So that's the mega in this for the first time. And he actually calls that the tipping point. That's the biggest the city can get, and after that, it's downfall. You see, it's tyranny, it's necropolis, it's the death city, basically. So this is the megalopolis is the high point, and from there it only goes downwards. That's as big as we can go. If we then jump a bit to John Gottman, which that's actually one that you might have heard before, who's also using the megalopolis. That's actually in the literature quite often used as the first time that the mega region is also mentioned. And he uses, again, the east coast of the US. You see, this is all very Western theory, because he uses here, like around New York, Washington, Boston, this kind of east coast of the US as the megalopolis. And you see 600 kilometers and 30 million people, which at that point was, of course, massive. It's still massive today, but what we see in China is, of course, again, much, much bigger. But what John Goodman has done is differentiate between different functions that create this concentration. So, of course, it's residential. Of course, there's just a lot of people living there. That makes a mega region. But it's also what he calls the maritime facade, so all the ports where the ships go in and out with goods and with people at that time also. And then it's all the economic functions, so the manufacturing, commercial, financial functions, all the companies that are there that make a lot of money. That's also important. It's culture, cultural leadership. Still today, of course, New York is a big cultural center also. It's the political stuff in Washington. That's where all the politicians are sitting. So the US president is still in Washington. And he says that all these things work together. And he uses that, it's a bit pretentious, but that's mutually reinforcing. So all these six things, they work together and reinforce each other to create this huge megalopolis. The next point then in history was to go from these regions, from these big agglomerations, to world cities and global cities. And there's from John Friedman, and then I think a useful quote that cities throughout the world are used by global capital as basing points in the spatial organization and articulation of production and markets. Again, very complicated, very theoretical, but what that means is globalization. And the things that we look at today, and like the skyline of Hong Kong, it is what it is for large parts because of globalization. And these big skyscrapers that we see here, when you look out of your window, these towers there, it's not just there because Hong Kong is a big city, but it's because these are banks and these are other kind of companies that operate globally and that use Hong Kong as a very important point in that global network. And it's a lot about that the CEO from HSBC can go next door to the CEO of the Bank of China, and then they can have lunch together. This is what creates these kind of huge skylines and these huge concentrations. And a lot of researchers, again, this started with John Friedman with the world city hypothesis, and then Saskia Sassen, which you probably also know, with the global city theory. And there has been a lot of research in that to kind of create these networks, to draw these networks of the biggest cities in the world and how important they are, where the big banks are, where the big law firms are, all that kind of stuff. And still today you have in the UK at the University of Loughborough, there's a globalization and world cities network. And until today, they do these kind of graphs, these kind of research projects with all kinds of hierarchies. These are the biggest and most important world cities. And it's the alpha plus plus world cities and alpha plus and beta, I don't know, all these lists of cities in the world and why they are important. And you see Hong Kong always quite far up there, together with Shanghai, Beijing. And then when you go further down the line, you see people like places like Chengdu and other, let's say, smaller Chinese cities also. You can find a lot of these lists. My point actually is that this is not super useful because it's always starting with the one city and its network to the other individual big cities. And I think what was very helpful there was to take that again more to regional level. And that was theory from the early 2000s, late 90s. What here, these different people who wrote a very nice book called The Global City Region or Global City Regions. And they actually go back to this mutually reinforcing thing, what you saw with the megalopolis, with these different factors. And they are talking about how those different factors create specialized centers, again, driven by the global network, but then centers that are locally creating very different environments. And then you have here traditional downtown centers or business centers, but then you also have these internal and external edge cities. You have these outermost city complexes, so things that are somehow being arranged outside around the city. All kinds of specialized subcenters. And that's, I think, a very useful basis for what we see as the megaregion in the 21st century, that is this specialized polycentric region. Something where you can see that very nicely today is generally in European regions. This is in Germany. You might know some of these places, Düsseldorf, Cologne, Dortmund. You might have heard of these, or of the football clubs maybe. But this is a region, the Rhine region and the Ruhr region, all with their specialized centers. Cologne, for example, is more of a media city. Düsseldorf is more of a fashion city and kind of financial services. Duisburg, Essen, those are more industrial cities where they had old coal mines. Today they have a big inland ports and all that kind of stuff. And all these different centers of medium-sized cities, they together create that huge Rhine-Ruhr region, which is, again, a lot of people. This might be 8, 9, 10 million people, I think, or something. And it's very specialized and has all these different subcenters. Then, also in the early 2000s, for the first time, we get really structured literature or research projects on the megaregion. And Richard Florida, another rather popular name, I think, that you might have heard of, he's really been doing some of the most famous, let's say, newer research on megaregions. And what he's doing, he's actually going back to that world scale. He says we have a spiky world. You see here in gray, it's not so nice as an image, but you see all these spikes, the spikes of population or GDP or scientists that are concentrated somewhere. And what Richard Florida is doing then, he's using that to make these maps of megaregions of the world. Then we see here on the left is the US, here's Europe. He's drawing these patterns and saying, okay, these are the megaregions. This is then, here you see probably a bit small on your screen, but BOSWASH, so Boston, Washington, that was that US East Coast from John Goodman earlier. So Boston, New York, Washington. And he's drawing all that dots basically based on quantitative research where these megaregions are. And a lot of that has been done over the last years. We can see similar things when you Google megaregions. So when you search megaregions, this is a lot of what you get. These are the megaregions of the world. These are the megaregions in the US, and we try to draw lines around it. And there's some more, the world's megaregions and how important they are. I think this really doesn't help us further. Also with what you're trying to do, this is very static. It's written here. It's fixed and hierarchical. It's very okay. Does this belong to the megaregion or not? I think this is the discussion you might have, but it's way too dominating in the literature, because at least instead what we should be doing is to look much more at the internal processes of these megaregions. What's happening inside? What are actually the processes that make these megaregions what they are? Whereas this is just drawing a line saying here it is, also what you've seen here. This is just, okay, this is it. So I want to look a bit more. I think actually what is much more important for us is to look at these internal processes. We've been seeing when it comes to the planning of megaregions, there are basically two sides. So there are people who are more positive or more negative about it. What you see on the right, again, also Richard Florida involved in this. This is a book by Catherine Ross, also from the US. And they say, yeah, okay, we need to plan for these mega regions. So they bring us economic advantage that helps us to coordinate infrastructure development. We can have better policies. We can work better on our environmental systems and so on. Then on the other hand, and that's this one, another book, but I mean, this for both of these, there are many papers also around that, from John Harrison and Michael Heuler from the UK. They are much more critical, and they say there's a lot of actors in this who use this mega speak, like everything is mega, and we have to create big projects, so we need big investments, and that's kind of this boosterism that just we just use that terminology, we just use these words to justify the developments we're doing, and that also makes it a kind of a weird scale to work with. Yeah, then they also criticize there's too much of a focus on high-speed rail. I will come to that, and that the local requirements might actually get lost in that. And the quote underneath that, I think, is quite crucial here, because it's this mega regions mean different things to different actors in different contexts, all with different goals. So if we as in an academia, if we say a mega region, this is a mega region, it means something very different from a politician who will kind of use that to promote his or her region or city. Yeah, just quickly the example of high-speed rail. In the US, these mega regions, and what you see are these are the gray ones. There was just another definition of that that is being used a lot for infrastructure planning, for high-speed rail planning. And then you could say, okay, yeah, so we need better high-speed rail networks. But I think these also often are quite exclusionary. You see here on the left in California, you have like a few stops and along this red line from San Diego to Sacramento. But then when you just look at Los Angeles here, this is just aerial picture of Los Angeles. This is just one little dot, whereas this is also a huge plain of urbanized land. And so just looking at the mega region and saying, okay, here are our biggest dots in that mega region, and we need to connect those, that really does not appreciate or acknowledge the complexity of that urban landscape. We see similar things in Europe, right? Where we have the bigger, we actually have a great rail network here, right? But it's quite often, it's also very exclusionary. We say, okay, it helps you to go from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, from Paris to London, and so on. But we quite often tend to forget those in-between places where those in-between places where also a lot of people are living, where a lot of economic activity is happening. And that is actually, I think, in China, in the Greater Bay Area, a very similar thing, right? We will see that later. You can take the high-speed rail from Kowloon Station, right, to Shenzhen North, or wherever you go in Shenzhen. You're there in 10 minutes. Amazing, right? Great infrastructure. But then when you look at the new territories in Hong Kong, they've always kind of been neglected in that process. And that has pros and cons, right? That can also mean that it's a bit more of a quiet place. It's mean that it has not been as focused by developments in the last 40 years. But we are overlooking places if we simply plan mega regions with big high-speed rail lines. Last part from this clusters and competitiveness. Zooming out again a bit, you might have heard a lot about this, urban sprawl, right? Urban sprawl is something you've all heard of, and then this is also tends to be described relatively badly. But if we look at things like Tesla gigafactories, right? They still follow. I mean, these are huge buildings, obviously, and not very human friendly often. But they still follow a certain pattern. They are still, if you look at here, they are still in big urban regions of the world. And when you look at in the US, it's still, this is in close to New York, basically. This is in Texas, I believe, and also on the West Coast. So if in Germany, it's in Berlin or close to Berlin, and in China, it's in Shanghai. So these things are still somehow clustered around these bigger agglomerations of the world. And then again, in the US, if we zoom in on that, Silicon Valley, right? All these companies that are so famous and that kind of changed the world in the last 20 years, Google, Apple, Amazon, and so on, they are not just clustered in the US, and they are not just clustered in California or in Northern California, no, but they are clustered in an extremely small place here in these few little cities south of San Francisco. So they don't just use the bigger region as their place of concentration, but it's really this, and that's what you saw, just like with Hong Kong, with all the skyscrapers next to each other. Also here, they use this very specific part of the region to cluster, because they want to be connected. They are afraid of missing out of something. So that's just another factor to cluster companies, to cluster people together in a certain place. We will come back to what that means for China, for the Greater Bay Area. So from the theory, what we see, there's concentration happening. In the biggest sense, there's concentration in cities, in regions, in countries, and continents. We always see different kind of forces of concentration. We see that these forces are reinforcing each other. They work together to create even bigger forces. We see that there's a strategic focus to really focus just on the most important points in these areas, and that often neglects in between spaces. And we see certain clusters that have themes. What you just said, Silicon Valley has a theme on high tech. They have certain sectors that they work on, and eventually there's also a certain narrative, right? There's just also, everybody knows that Hong Kong is a super important financial center. Everybody knows that Beijing is a very important political center, and other people, other actors are using or following that narrative to make their decisions on where to work, where to live, where to expand their activities. Again, reinforcing is the big word here. Now, that was a lot, right? A lot of big history, and I hope that gives you a bit of a theoretical background of what we're dealing with. The next part is now actually to apply that to the Greater Bay Area. And to see what actually that kind of environment that you're also looking at now, where you guys also live, how that is, how these forces, these mutually reinforcing forces of concentration, how they pan out there. You were probably aware of this, right? But like China, if you look at the map of the country, there are different mega regions that have also been defined here. There's then the major mega regions. You're of course here in the Greater Bay Area. There's the whole thing around Shanghai, and then there's Jing-Jin-Ji, which you've also heard of, right? Like Beijing and its surroundings, or Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, I think it is. And that as a third major mega region. And then you also have all kinds of other, let's say, smaller mega regions that are really defined on a national level, right? Xi Jinping supports this map in that way. He's saying that these are the important mega regions. And you also see this again, there's the big regions, and then there's these lines connecting it, the big infrastructure corridors. We're of course focusing on the Greater Bay Area, which I think you know. And then there's also planning. There are of course a lot of plans for that Greater Bay Area, and different kinds of way of structuring that region. And again, you see a lot of a focus on points and the big centers and the lines that are connecting these points as big infrastructural corridors. And we can go down all the way to the city level. In Hong Kong, again, the Hong Kong 2030 Plus plan also talks about centers, so points of concentration. Points of concentration, and the corridors that are connecting these points. And I think especially in the Chinese planning system, you can go all the way down to the city level and see similar plans. So even when you have a neighborhood plan, you will see there's drawings of important centers, and then the lines that connect them. In that case, then the streets. So through all these levels, we have a similar visual planning approach. So finally now, we can look at how all these regional planning strategies and these regional development forces, how they work together with the mega projects. You can see now on the right is always that map, and there are little points that will indicate where the mega projects are and how they are connected. And the most obvious one, and I guess if you've been doing some drawing of mega regions for the last week, then you all know that this is a mega project in Hong Kong, I suppose. West Kowloon, the biggest tower in the city, surrounded by more huge towers. You may have seen this drawing before, but it's residential and office towers on top of a shopping mall, on top of an MTR station, on top of a high-speed rail station. It's extremely compact. It's extremely focused on, concentrated on that one point with all these different functions for working, for living, and for transportation. And at the same time, and now we jump again from that very local level, it is, of course, also a massive gateway to the surrounding region, right? The West Kowloon terminus, the high-speed rail station, that is just a starting point. I think that, yeah, it's a starting point for transport connections around the whole region, even the whole country, because it takes you, I mean, there's actually that split, you know, from the airport high-speed, the airport express and the high-speed rail to Shenzhen, but it's both of the starting points in West Kowloon. And they take you extremely fast to Hong Kong Airport, to Shenzhen, to Guangzhou, wherever you want to go. So you see that working on this extreme point of physical spatial concentration that is mixed with this extremely efficient connection all around the region. And that's where that mega project sits within the region and is such an important point in the mega region. And then when you take the Airport Express and you come to the airport, then that's another mega project, of course. So this huge island just being built there, which you all know, which is again also kind of a mixed use, highly concentrated point with a shopping mall, with all the stuff that belongs to an airport, with all the cargo infrastructure, for example. So those were just two examples. Now we jump on the Shenzhen side, and then the Shanghai Cooperation Zone, which will lead us to a rather different way of seeing these mega projects, because I think you all know that, right? The Shanghai Cooperation Zone, this half circle at the west coast of Shenzhen. A lot of this, right? Again, high buildings, a lot of companies, office buildings, a big infrastructure around it, big shopping malls and so on. What you've seen here, right? This forgot the name of that mall right now, but it's also a lot of landscaping around it. There's big light shows and all that stuff. There's a Ferris wheel. So it's, again, you see the mutually reinforcing dynamics here that create this kind of mixed zone. That half circle, I think when you stand on one end of it, it is already too big to even take a picture of it. All right, you need to use that panorama function on your phone to even get all of this into one picture. But then the plans for this thing are, and I'm sure you've also seen that before, the plans are to expand that even further. You just saw on the right, we go from that little circle to that even bigger circle. Because the planning model for the Shanghai Cooperation Zone is being expanded all along the west coast of Shenzhen. And then we have here in red the original cooperation zone. We will get these other bay areas added to that. We have an airport area around the existing Shenzhen airport. And then here in the north, what is called then a marine new town area. And looking at that, a lot of that is already under construction. I think here's also that expo, that exhibition area in the north. We're using that heavily concentrated model of a mega project as the Shanghai Cooperation Zone, and we're spreading that along the whole coast. And now if you look at the back on the right, that's a very important moment that is happening here, because I now talked for the last 30 minutes, I only talked about concentration, things being closer together, being nicely connected, but now we actually expand that at such a big scale. And that is what you see, this big red circle. We expand that at such a big scale that somehow shapes the whole form of this mega region. It becomes so big that the mega project itself becomes a massive part of that whole mega region. And that is my whole point, and we'll come also to that. But from the mega region, we come to the mega project, very concentrated, and the mega project itself becomes so big that it shapes the mega region again. Similar things, so that's not just one example. Nansha Port, so this is southern tip of Guangzhou. This is just a cargo terminal, right? I mean, not just a cargo terminal, but it's one of the biggest cargo terminals in the world here in Nansha. But it's not just that little area. It's also part of a bigger planning initiative where you have here, that's number one here on the tip. You have all kinds of other developments in that whole, yeah, maybe you can call it a peninsula or this kind of marshland there. And here you see all kinds of different blocks within that. So there's harbor block, startup area blocks. So we see again, there's this clustering and this branding of these places as somehow being special. But again, you see one point of concentration spreading out into the region. When we go in a bit further, yeah, we zoom in a bit further, looking at what these places actually are. We see a lot of clustering. You know, yeah, you can also call it branding. When I was yeah, doing field work in these areas, right, or in the GBA, I can obviously not read. I cannot read Chinese, so a lot of it I cannot read. But luckily, there's also a lot of English translations that kind of show how these places are called. And you see things like industrial parks, innovation parks. There's like now a few more of these pictures, but you see incubator blocks, startup blocks. You see here, no, I cannot read it myself. Cloud centers, yeah, innovation centers, all these kind of branding places. A lot of this is in Shanghai also. Innovation centers, yeah, kind of parks and these things. So a lot of places get this kind of brand to say, we are here, we are a place for innovation, we are a place for startups, we are a hub, a center, again, somehow concentrating things or concentrating a certain narrative in those places. And then, yeah, here on the left, I think that is always my favorite, because you end up with very strange names, like the Shanghai, Shenzhen, Hong Kong Youth Innovation and Entrepreneur Hub. Right, extremely long, complicated names, whatever that is. But apparently, it's very important that this is the Youth Innovation and Entrepreneur Hub. So they become very, very specific about what they actually want to be. Yeah, you probably know that the higher education mega center in Guangzhou, this big island with all the different universities on it. So again, education as a sector to be promoted here. So what that gets us to is that we have a situation where whenever we have like developable land in that mega region, we get these branding, these labels onto it to promote them as important clusters. And that these are innovation districts, science park, tourist cities, education cities, startup blocks, and so on. So and that is they're not doing that for fun, but it's to somehow make those places seem important, say that this is what we need, this is what we focus on, this is what we want to attract here. So giving places this meaning, this economic meaning especially, that is really a lot also what drives mega projects. And that's, yeah, we're just still in the very beginning of that, but trying to structure this, and we can go from a hub that's often it's more of a building. We can go from a hub to a block to a district, all the way to a zone, like a special economic zone or like an industrial city. These things are being called very different namings, right? Because I mean, most of these projects are not being, these projects are not being financed by urban planners or by architects, but it's the developers around it, and they don't make academic distinctions between, is this now a block or a district or a zone, but it's also a lot about what feels right. Well, how can we attract investment? But that is one thing of structure, or one way of structuring it. And another way of structuring it would be around sectors and themes. We focus more on creative industries, so more on tourism, more on science. We have these themes what I just showed. It's like innovation, very abstract. This is an innovation center. Whatever innovation exactly is, right? It's often very unclear in this context. Same goes for things like entrepreneurship and cooperation. The Shanghai Cooperation Zone is, I mean, in that case, a place for cooperation between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, but often these names are used in a much more abstract way. So this is just really earlier what we're also looking for, this kind of distribution into how can we kind of structure these different projects and these clustering efforts by scale, from small to large, and then also by sectors or themes or values. Now, basically coming to conclusions, because what we've seen now is a lot of theory on where mega regionalization has come from and what are the forces. We've looked at the GBA on seeing how that actually plays out in space. And now we kind of bring that together first, most of all in that conceptual framework. I think I've said it now a few times, but now to summarize that again, not to make that also visual, is we start with the mega region. In the mega region, so that's the GBA. The GBA is there as a mega region. Then there's processes of mega regionalization that transform it. Urban compaction, or what I mostly call concentration, but it's more academically, it would be urban compaction. And these are ambitions and dynamics that then lead to mega projects being produced, let's say, from these big ambitions, from these big forces. We say, oh yeah, now we need mega projects to make that a reality. And now what you've seen is that these mega projects, they again reinforce that regional idea, and that at some points these mega projects get so big that they reshape the whole mega region as a place. And that's how you see from starting with the mega region, leading to mega projects, and the mega projects then making that mega region even stronger. And that is that mega region, mega projects interplay. And that's how these regions, places like the GBA, become ever stronger and bigger and faster, and how everything concentrates in these places and keeps being concentrated in these regions. That's the theoretical part, basically, or let's say the conceptual background of a lot of my research and what I've been doing. It explains you, I think there's just a few images. It explains how we look at these big places, how we have to see them as very complex constellations, and how that gives us a better understanding of the mega region and the different parts that it's being built up by and how they are connected. Just a little teaser of what we've been doing. Gerhard might have shown you some of the speculative game boarding stuff, so how we try to build scenarios for that. Jashu and I have been doing similar stuff in Shenzhen also, right? Looking at these big regional things and kind of finding a playful way of thinking about the future. And this is now from my PhD, where we've been doing similar stuff, right? Where first we draw conceptual plans for parts of the mega region. This was Hong Kong, Shenzhen mostly, and then that leads to certain new patterns, so to new land use patterns also. And then I'm just going to quickly click through this, but this was really scenarios in my PhD for Hong Kong and Shenzhen, how you see there's different kinds of scenarios, again, following different narratives, where it might be more concentrated, might be more linear, kind of corridor development, kind of in between stuff, where you see really these big structures happening, but within these big structures, there are also smaller projects happening or being designed in different ways. This is really more of a drawing exercise. You can also make that more empirical, really use some, or more automated, using really more of GIS analytics looking at how these patterns would then change to different kind of land use patterns. I'm just going to click a bit back and forth where you see just little pixels here and there changing, but in the end, how these different conceptual planning outlines lead to very different land use patterns. So there you have always these collections of maps, and this is actually a way to think about future developments that are caused by all this these dynamics I showed before. And then lastly, you can also do assessments of this, right? Again, a lot of GIS stuff that you say, okay, in this map, how does that actually change the access to metro stations? How does that change land use diversity? So that you also get a more scientific way of comparing these different scenarios. That was just as a little example, which was also from my thesis, if you're interested in that, also from the PolyU website on compact mega. This also has all of the theoretical stuff, but maybe if you want to know a bit more about the scenarios, you can have a look at that. Very last thing, this is, I mean, the company I'm working for, Buck Consultants International, you will find it as BCI Global online. As I said, a consultancy firm, just got 40 years old from the Netherlands. We are headquartered in the Netherlands. Working for both private and public sector clients. So we do a lot of supply chain strategy, for example, also for clients all over the world. What I'm mostly working at is these spatial economic strategies, and that's here the blue part, economic development and innovation promotion, where we actually work a lot with public sector clients. So we work with cities and regions and these kind of organizations to actually look a lot into what I just showed now, and these strategic clustering development processes in regions and how we can build better futures for these kinds of cities and regions. That's just, if you're interested, I think for architecture students, this might not be the company that you will work for in the future, but it's still something I think to consider and to see that it's also companies like the one I'm working for that work on these kind of processes, sometimes with a very different perspective. That's it. Thank you very much.